Hello and good evening. Welcome to our debate we've got going on here. Just to let you know, this is Scolmore. This is something SGTV. So SGTV normally does some absolute fantastic stuff. This is going to be absolutely no different. This is a live recording though, so you get the chance to actually interact with us. I've got over here, contrary to the belief, I haven't got the England match on this other screen over here. What I have got is I've got the chats coming through. So it's a chance for you to interact with us. Not just me, but also the panel that we've got as well, whilst the debate is ongoing. There's a couple of you already in saying hello to each other and hello to me. It's absolutely fantastic to be back here working with you. But I'm not on my own. I come aided tonight with a very good friend of mine who I've been doing lots with over the years. So Paul from Napier, you're here, aren't you, tonight, mate?
That's right, Darren. Yeah, happy to get involved.
Yeah, and we've got Boyd, who I've done quite a bit with Boyd as well.
Good evening.
And we've got David, who's done loads with us over at Scolmore. So we're all in. Hello, David.
Evening all.
So here we go. We're going to start to look at the private rented sector, and more importantly, the deadlines that are coming up. So, Paul, we're on the eve of a deadline, are we not?
That's right. Yeah.
So the deadline means what exactly?
Well, really and truthfully, when the regulations were written, nobody knew that COVID was just around the corner. So landlords need to take reasonable steps to ensure that these EICRs are conducted. So really and truthfully, contractors need to stay relaxed and don't worry. You know, the police are not going to come chasing down people for not getting these inspections done within the next few weeks. The landlord needs to show reasonable steps. Now, that doesn't mean that they can now start thinking, oh, I've got thousands of properties. From this date, I'll start to make steps to make the improvements. But if anybody's been trying to get this work done and they've got evidence, they've got emails or text messages to support that they've been doing that, the local authorities are not going to go after those guys. So really and truthfully, yes, it should have been a deadline, but it's quite clear that we're going to need to mop it up over the next few weeks.
But isn't this a second deadline? Because the private rented sector in my old company, I was talking about it quite a lot, because we've had a deadline come and go already, haven't we?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the regulations were published, I think, in January 2020. So the landlords did have plenty of warning they were coming. And then they come into force in June or July, around then, 2020. And that was for new tenancies. So if there's a new tenancy going ahead, there was a responsibility to get an EICR done, or electrical safety check, as the regulations refer to. Of course, our regulations mean that we use EICRs, but the PRS regulations will talk about electrical safety checks. So that was for new tenancies, and then for any existing tenancies, they've had the deadline of the 1st of April. So that's the two deadlines that we're used to talking about.
So let's be quite clear then, Paul. This deadline of tomorrow, if the landlord has been proving that they've been trying, but they've got people in, maybe shielding, maybe some people that may be considered vulnerable, if they really don't want to risk it at the moment, although that deadline is there, if they're making sure that they're putting some controls in place, such as they've got it booked in, or they're aware of it, or they're talking to their tenants about what they should or shouldn't do, that's fine, is it?
Yeah, I think so. It's all about making sure that they took those reasonable steps to make it happen, because of course any one of those scenarios could happen. It could be somebody shielding, a difficult tenant. It could be that the electrical contractor's not been very helpful.
Fancy that.
Sorry, guys. We've been very. We've been, for 2 years now, as a trade association, NAPIT have been going to the different landlords associations. So we work with the National Residential Landlords Association, and we've been doing webinars. Frank Bertie, our Chief Technical Officer, I was chatting to him today. He said he's been doing webinars to up to 600, 700, 800, 900 landlords at a time. So they're coming on, and we're delivering why it's important to use somebody that's registered and competent, why it's important to have people that have got the correct insurances in place, etc. Landlords are the person responsible. Yeah. So at the end of the day, if they choose to get a lesser report, or they're happy to go that way, they're the one that carries the can if there's any problems. Okay, so So we've been trying to educate them on the importance of having a proper thorough inspection carried out. Okay, so it's not just something that we started doing last month. We've been doing it for a couple of years. In fact, just going to plug this, but it's
here we go.
a few months now. But this book here is guidance that we wrote for landlords, and it's handy for electrical inspectors as well, because quite often a landlord will say, well, where does it mean that? And people can say, well, look, this is a book from the National Association of Professional Inspectors and Testers, and it quite clearly shows that in this circumstances, these are the rules. So the guidance is out there. It's been out there. We've also got the Electrical Safety Roundtable, which is all the organisations contribute towards that.
Yes.
And they've helped draft the guidance for the government. So there's lots of material out there that people can turn to, whether it's a landlord or an electrical contractor.
So with all this information out there, do we think all landlords are doing what they should be doing?
Well, maybe the other guys could comment
We'll
on
bring
that.
them in. Should we bring them in? So, David, we'll start with you. So are you finding that landlords are tripping over themselves to come to people like you and get their properties inspected?
Yeah, certainly there's been a bit of a gold rush on from landlords and agencies, some of whom haven't recognised that this deadline is approaching, or perhaps haven't taken it seriously, as it's April the 1st, the deadline that's been set for. Obviously, the timing of it is all pretty terrible. And a lot of landlords and agencies perhaps found that it's been difficult to get contractors in, just because we have all been so hammered, not just because of the amount of inspection work coming in. As I was talking to Boyd off camera before we started, the fact that people are sat at home, staring at the walls, not spending money on holidays, has meant a big increase in installation work in home offices, in, as Boyd was saying to me earlier, in outbuildings going in. So there's been a lot of pressure. It's been one of the busiest years that I've known in the business. So to have this sort of put on as well has been quite tricky.
So
the problem with landlords, of course, is they don't necessarily know what service they're getting.
This is what I was going to ask.
It falls down. Just this afternoon, someone has sent me a condition report they received after a chap came in. Spent about 15 minutes in the property, which obviously
that long.
Must have taken time to wipe his boots. I don't know why it took it so long, but the report he sent me is so full of errors, omissions, and what must be fabricated data for the amount of time spent. But as Paul was just saying, this is the tenant that sent me this information after he's badgered his agency to get it. The agency are the ones who have sent this guy in, who isn't on any PRS register. He's not accredited with anyone. So there's no way to know whether he is actually competent, qualified, insured to be doing this kind of work. No one's overseeing him. I've checked his website, so he doesn't pretend to be accredited with anybody. But you don't know what kind of bona fides this chap has. And what I said to this tenant was, well, it's the agency who are potentially landing themselves in trouble. They may think they've covered themselves by getting this paperwork in with someone else's signature on, but if they've not got any way to prove that this guy is suitable for doing this job, he could be doing hundreds of properties for them and producing this, what is clearly nonsense.
Yeah.
And this is just being rinsed and repeated, and it's only when someone gets hurt or some kind of disaster happens that anybody really steps in and has a closer look at it. And so, yes, workload's increased, but I don't think landlords, they're ticking the boxes, but they're not necessarily getting the cover that they think they're getting.
Yeah, well, now we're talking about dodgy EICRs. It's time to bring Boyd in. So here we are, Boyd. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So are you finding the same in your area? So dodgy EICRs. What can you do about it? Can you just deliver the bad news to the landlord that they need it doing again?
Well, I've had a number of, if you like, issues with different. I work for about 3 different letting agents in our local area, and different landlords. I'm actually finding people I know has friends who I didn't know were landlords. They're asking me, look, I've had a condition report done by another electrician, but he's telling me I need a fuse board change. Why do I need a fuse board change? It's only the house was wired 20 years ago, etc. And I've seen the report, like David said, I've seen the reports, and I get quite a lot of these sort of, if you like, ask for a bit of second of opinion from letting agents and different landlords. And I'm seeing what David said. They're not writing the certificate or the report out correctly. They don't know what they're doing. They're either not in the property long enough, they're not testing it fully. I saw one the other day that the scheduled circuit details where you should have at least an R1, an R2 or an R2 reading, all NA, not applicable. So he hasn't tested anything in that respect. And some of them, you know, you might as well just say to the letting agent, do you know what you're actually meant to be getting here? Because what you've got, it doesn't certify, it doesn't tell you the safety of this installation for continued use. And that is the first line of what this purpose of the report is for. Is the installation certified for, or satisfied for continued use? And half of the time, the ones I see, they're not even filled out correctly. Because of the influx of work that we've had, the letting agents, I think, are just taking on the cheaper, and the landlords, I should say, are taking on the cheaper end of the market in terms of people who don't really know how to do it.
It's funny you mentioned that, because, by the way, everyone watching this, you do have the ability to chat with us and communicate with us today, and some of you are already doing so, so we'll pick some of the views up. And I'll ask the two Sparks that are in the room before I come on to you, Paul. Not that you're not a Sparks, by the way, but I'll just ask the practicing ones amongst us, shall I? What's the views on competing out there? Because some are saying this, they're doing it for less than £100 for some of these. Now, I know full well you're going to need to be in there sort of half a day-ish, aren't you, to complete some of these? And is that feasible, or are people just pulling the rug from under some of you?
There's some of these national companies that I've seen offering them out for £100 a go, or £130, £150 across any property size. And you cannot do a condition report based on that value. I mean, for instance, I done one about 4 months ago in a all-electric ground floor flat. It had 16 circuits, off-peak and on-peak. You had storage heaters, electric plinth heaters in the kitchen. There were 16 circuits. It took us 4 hours, two men, to do properly. You can't charge that for £100, £150. You couldn't even fill out the certificate or the report for that sort of money. So the letting agents, landlords getting a figure of £100 a certificate, I'm sorry, you can't do it.
Is that what you're finding in your area, David, as well? I mean, I've got geographical areas. So you're Watfordish, aren't you, Boyd?
Yeah.
And David, you're whereabouts?
Warwickshire, so in the Midlands.
Okay, so for the Midlands, would that price you out as well, doing them for less than £100?
Absolutely, and as Boyd was about to say, like Boyd, I charge per circuit. And it's the same with other walks of life, like pat testing, for example. There's just no point in trying to compete with those who are doing it cheap, because they're simply not doing it. They are just slapping stickers on, filling out forms, and they're not actually doing the job. Okay. There's no point trying to compete with that. You have to set a price that works for you, for your business, that you're happy with charging, and go with that. And yes, you're going to not win some of the work out there. Doesn't matter. So
with that, I'm going to come back to Paul here and ask Paul. So you touched upon electrical safety roundtable. Wouldn't this be something that they could help with?
Well, not really. The pricing it's always the same. There's always a race to the bottom with anything. Yeah. Most of the contractors I've spoken to are similar to what we're hearing here, is that they know their worth. And that's the best advice I could give it to anybody, is you've got to know your worth and you've got to stick to it, because it's your name on the report ultimately. And if you're stating that something's safe for continued use and you haven't checked it thoroughly, you know, if anything goes wrong, you could be, in serious problems. Now, the problem you've got is some unscrupulous inspectors will use limitation on their form. Right. Now, limitations are supposed to be agreed with the client.
Yes.
There's a space to say who it was agreed with. So in our guidance to the landlords, we make sure the landlords know all about limitations, genuine ones, operational ones, and where to look and to see where it's agreed and where to look on the test certificate, because that's the biggest problem here. If we can get people asking questions and saying, hold on a minute, this report's got lim written on it, I never agreed to that. That's the only way you're going to stamp it out from a standards point of view. We cannot police what people charge. And around the country, it's all different. You'll quite often find the prices down here on the south coast and in London, etc., will be rather on the high side anyway. You know, so I can't comment on what people charge, but what we can do is comment on the accuracy of a report and make sure that people are aware that if you pay cheap prices, it's likely you're going to get something that's not worth the paper it's written on.
So rather than looking at it from a price point of view, would it be better for us as an industry to all get together and say, okay, right, EICRs in a rented property will agree on a minimum standard. So maybe we say, all right, we will all agree, we will inspect a minimum of 25% per circuit. Is that something that Electrical Safety Roundtable would consider?
Well, I mean, the guidance that they've got out there is 100% of circuits should be tested with a minimum of 20% accessories inspected. Okay, so that would be all circuits tested and about 20% of the sockets and switches and things dropped to have a look at the internal connections. Now, years and years ago when I've done my 2391, they were teaching 10%. When we wrote our guidance, we said, let's go for 20%. It's a little bit more thorough, but it's still not asking too much. What people get confused with is sampling of circuits.
Yes.
And as you know, in a properly managed commercial environment, it can work. If it's being rotated and it's part of a program and it's been assessed and dealt with correctly. But it cannot work in a private rented sector because one guy goes in 1 year and he says, well, I'll just do the easy circuits. And then 5 years later, somebody goes in and does the same. There could be circuits that never get inspected. So trying to get the education across to landlords, letting agents, so that they understand what they're paying for, and also the grey areas. So fixed appliances, is it being done as part of the EICR? If not, have you took measures to get it inspected as part of a pack testing regime? If you're renting out the equipment as part of your tenancy agreement, so there's all sorts of problems and issues that we have to address.
Yeah. Okay. So, Boyd, what are you doing with regarding appliances? Are you adding them on a part of your service, or are you clearly telling them we do everything but appliances?
Fixed wiring only generally is what I put on the ICR, and I asked, do you want me to test the portable appliances you plugged in stuff? The fixed wired appliances like the built-in ovens, the built-in dishwashers, etc. Again, it could take you 20 minutes to half an hour per appliance to physically take it out of his housing. And you tell a customer that you're going to do an ERCR and installation plus an extra 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds an appliance, they're going to say, don't bother.
Yeah, you're not about pulling apart somebody's integrated kitchen, are you?
They're all integrated now, aren't they? They're nearly all integrated now. Exactly. So yeah, you're going to go. So, but David, what are you finding around limitations when you hand it over? Are people that you're handing it to, do they know what that document does? Do they care what the document says?
No, and I think this is a major part of the problem is that anything you try and do to try and increase, whether it's increasing the amount of stuff you're testing or whatever, the guys who are going to do it diligently will carry on doing it diligently, and you're potentially sticking more paperwork on them. The guys who are going to shortcut it are just going to carry on shortcutting it, so long as nobody's really policing it.
Yeah, okay.
And they can get away with it. So I think part of the problem is the complexity of the form, the unfriendliness of the form as far as your average homeowner is concerned. You present them with this thing, and obviously it's a British standard document, isn't it? It means nothing to them. The data on it means nothing to them. They are reliant on you communicating what those results mean, what the problems are, and what the next steps are to try and resolve them. And I think that's where this whole sort of process falls down. And the more complicated anyone attempts to make the form to try and get more testing more diligently done, just runs the risk that it overcomplicates things even further and makes it more difficult for the homeowner to understand. You almost need perhaps like a grading system like you have with an EPC, where you can say, right, this is a grade A electrical installation. It meets current the current edition, the requirements of the current edition. This is a grade B installation. It meets the previous requirements. This is a grade C or whatever, just so that they can picture in their head in an easy sort of fashion without having to decipher everything that's on this form. It sort of explains to them that, okay, this isn't the top of the range. I've got a grade D installation here. What do I need to do to bring this up? You must need to sort of simplify it perhaps like that to make it more accessible to not just homeowners but tenants, agents, etc.
Yeah.
And to give them a path where they can upgrade, but also to give them an incentive. So if you've got, for example, a landlord with student property who doesn't really want to spend much money on it, then perhaps the agency placing the students in that property can say, well, you can't charge top rent because you've got a grade D electrical system. It needs to be upgraded. If you want to charge a higher rent, you have to invest in this property that you've got to make it, to bring it up to
and they do with energy assessments, don't they? So if it's a certain grade
sort of
G or about, you can't rent it out again.
Something to make it accessible to the public so they know what this means. Because relying on the inspector to put it all into plain English for you is fine if the inspector is able to do that. But a lot of guys on the tools, of course, a lot of people on the tools, perhaps they're not great with their communication skills, with their keyboard skills, in being able to go to the customer and say, here's your report, and I've deciphered what it means, what the problems are, and how we need to take that forward. And a lot of people just receive this report and they don't know what they're looking at, and it hasn't been properly explained to them what they're looking at, and the limitations don't mean anything to them. But obviously you've got to have limitations out there. As we were just saying a moment ago, it's not always practical to get to all your accessories. You can't necessarily disassemble someone's fitted kitchen or rip their lino pulling the washing machine out.
Yeah.
You want to get to as much as you can, but there are just practical things at the end of the day that stop you from being able to do it. And again, it is a business. Even if you're not charging a stupid rate to be doing it, you're charging a reasonable rate, you still have to have it done in a reasonable time frame. You can't have it dragging into days because you're there trying to take apart someone's house.
Yeah, no, we've got a few questions coming in, so I'll go through some of them. Andy, good evening to you, Andy. Thank you for joining us. You mentioned here the fact that people are policed every single year. I think what we're finding is we're finding people outside of competent person schemes that do have that assessment every year completing these. I know that's been what the guys have been telling us, that there's so everyone's jumped on this opportunity, and although you don't have to be, Paul, do you? You don't have to be the competent person scheme. There are still things that the landlord must check that the electrician's got.
Yes, that's right, and the government has got guidance on it. So there is guidance that we, all the competent person schemes help draft, and we've certainly covered it in our guidance that we've written to show the landlord that there's a checklist of things that you need to check. So if you're choosing to use somebody that's not on a competent persons register, is there correct insurance in place? Is there correct qualifications in place? The qualifications to the 18th edition, test and inspection, relevant experience. Is the equipment calibrated? All of those things that a competent person scheme looks for, who's doing it if they're using somebody that's not on a registered list? So, there's great emphasis on using competent persons for this work. But of course, landlords are free to use whoever they want. There's no requirements. Competent person schemes, the requirements to be on there, remember, is built from the building regulations. So, the Part P of the building regulations, inspection work falls outside of that, unfortunately. But those checks still need to be made.
This is I was just going to butt in there, Paul, when you say about the Part P scheme, and obviously the policing of that. Now, some electrical contractors believe, or some homeowners, some landlords believe that it's policed by the NIC and NAPIT. Well, it's not, is it? We all know that the Part P scheme should be government who sort this side of it out, and local authorities sort this side out. Who's going to be policing this new PRS scheme? Because I've had letting agents actually speak to me and say, we don't know what the regulations are here. What have you got to do? Well, I've sent them the electrical safety roundtables literature, the pamphlet, and say, read that.
It's quite clear. It's in the regulations. If a landlord gets a fouled EICR, they have to submit it to the local authority. Okay?
They're not doing it, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing here, isn't it? We know what was written there, and you're quite right. The agreement here then that there should be, from the document you're issuing, that's got a unsatisfactory EICR, and we've had people now tonight comment and say it's got unsatisfactory on it. Surely that's enough. Well, once that gets pushed across, we're seeing landlords reluctant to do anything with that because they're aware then that they're going to raise the flag to the fact that their installation isn't quite right. But I'll ask you this because Paul knows that there are quite a few things with EICRs and the documentation. So you two have perhaps been out there doing one recently. You've come up with a few bits and bobs that you need doing on the EICR, but the landlord's chosen someone else to do it. Now, has that been common because they believe that either you're too busy to fit it in right now, you're too costly, and then all of a sudden, what happens with the EICR? Do they come back to you for a new one?
Yeah, there's a couple of incidences happen with me. I've done the condition report. The landlord said, thank you very much, and they've got others to do it. And as far as I'm concerned, that's as far as I need to take it.
Yeah.
It's up to them then to get their letter or minor work certificate or another installation certificate for any remedial works that have been done from my EICR. I have been asked by a couple of landlords. I've had an odd job man in, and he said he's fixed these things. Can you come back and test it again? I said, well, yeah, but I'll have to charge you for a whole new EICR because I can't confirm what he's done is exactly correct. And that's like Paul said. Use a competent person who's with a scheme. You're more than likely going to get somebody who's competent. But I have seen some contractors who are with schemes and they're still not competent. So. It's a hard one, really. And
now we've got someone. So again, a couple of bits coming in here. Someone said, and this is probably leading. I'll lead this one to Paul. Someone said, Simon Bell. Good evening, Simon. Thank you very much for joining us. It's probably one of the best things that's happened to the private rented sector. The fact that the EICRs now, it looks like a lot more are getting done than ever have been because the work that he's put here. Is absolute terrible. Some of the work that have been in the properties left for God knows how long. If this legislation would have got through, it would have just been left there. Now, what work went into actually pushing this legislation through, Paul?
Oh yeah, I mean we're massively happy that these regulations came about, and there was a lot of campaigning. A lot of organisations, including us, that were campaigning for safer properties in the private rented sector. Okay, now as the fellows would probably be able to agree with me, most things are found from inspection. Of course, you do get test results that will, throw up an issue, but most of the time it's inspection. So even if the reports are not as thorough as we would like them to be, the obvious, broken sockets or live terminals on show or a light fitting hanging off of the wall, those things are likely to be captured with the volume of inspections that are going on. So definitely, we're going to have a safer set of installations. There may be some way to go to getting the perfect installations, but straight away, we've got to welcome these regulations coming into place. From an electrical safety point of view, there's a lot more inspections going on. Yes, there are some bad ones we hear about, but there's hundreds, if not thousands, of contractors that are doing a good job, and they're out there doing lots per a week. So there's lots and lots of really good findings, being found out there.
Well, we know there's about 3.1 or 3.7 properties in the private rented sector. So no wonder they're busy. So it really is. It's no wonder that all of them have got to be done by that deadline tomorrow, or in and around it with COVID thing. Just to think, Andy, you're saying that your local building control has been quite good. Just let us know where that is if you don't mind. Just because I want to know the experience of these. So we've got one guy from Watford, so North London. What's your local building control been like? Have you had to use the scheme where you've had to notify the local building control that there are an unsatisfactory report? And the same with you, David. How have you found it?
I've just passed the information on to the duty holder, be that the agency or the landlord. I haven't passed anything on to the local authority.
What about you, Boyd? Anything there?
I don't send it to local authority. I send it to the person who's instructed me to do the works, which is generally the landlord. And I always attach the electrical safety roundtable landlord's guide with my failed or satisfactory EICR, so they know what their real responsibilities are. If they want to read it and send it to the local authority or to the tenant, that's up to them.
Is that the proper mechanism, Paul? Should it be that we hand it back as engineers to the person doing the work and they forward it on, just give it up and submit it to them? Or do we have to be part of that chain as well?
No, it's, from my understanding, it's the landlord's obligation under the regulations to pass it to the local authority if there's a foul, and then the local authority will work with them to, obtain evidence that things have been put right. And if they don't work with them, they could be subject to, improvement actions or fines. I forget the exact terminology for it. Remember, they've got the right up to £30,000 per property. It's not per a landlord, it's per a property. So if you've got a landlord that's got a few hundred properties, and he's in breach of, supplying a safe installation on a number of them, and that could be a hefty odd fine. So as I started this presentation by saying that there's going to be some sensibility factors built into this because of COVID, but as soon as a landlord comes under the radar for not doing the right thing, the local authority can use the regulations to enforce things. They can even get a contractor to do the work and pay for it and go after them that way. So they've got the ability to make things safe and then add that to the fine that they're going to charge them. Okay?
Really?
So let's just say that, a place needs a total rewire. They could go in there and they could say, we're going to employ one of these fine gentlemen here on the call to rewire it to the top standards, to the 18th edition, and then we're going to add that to the fine to the landlord. So the guidance is very clear that the regulations are very clear that the landlord has got obligations to meet here, and it shouldn't be the electrical contractors that need to worry about it. As Boyd says, they're employed to do a service, they do their report and they hand it over. Okay? If the landlords need some guidance, then they can come through to bodies. If they're a member of the National Residential Landlords Association that we work with, they will be on the phone to us and we can give guidance. Very clear. There's a lot of guidance out there. It really doesn't need to be complicated.
Now, you mentioned there that there's guidance, but there's that guidance that everyone can get hold of, isn't there, on the Electrical Safety Roundtable? That's a website we can go to, is it?
Yeah, that's right. I did print it off earlier in case anyone wants to see. You'll see this purple stuff in this ESR. See if
is that the one, Boyd? You're stapling that one on, is it?
I do that one and the electrical safety.
Can you see that?
Yeah, got that. electricalsafetyroundtable.co.uk.
And the electrical safety first have just produced one, which is pretty good as well.
Is that the same? Now, that's the mechanism. Now, what if anything, there's a period of time, is there not, where an unsatisfactory EICR must be returned into a satisfactory? Just confirm that for us, Paul.
Yeah, so if the guys give a C1, C2 or an FI, they can stipulate a time period and when that needs to be addressed. Okay, now we've given guidance to our contractors to say, look, you've got to be sensible. You can't say it needs to be done in the next hour because that might not be sensible. So the guys can give a shorter period, but it's up to a maximum of 28 days.
Right.
Okay.
That's good.
So they must deal with it within 28 days. But if the guys turn around and said, this really is, let's say we didn't have any earthing in a property, it's not immediately dangerous, but if a fault occurs, it's got that potential.
Yeah.
We're really not happy with this situation. We want to see this resolved within the next few days. Then that's within their rights to put that on the report. Okay.
So are you getting people come back, Boyd, asking you to return within that period?
I mean, to be fair, as soon as I put an unsatisfactory C1s, we sort out straight away, as we should do. C2s, yes, you get 28 days. Regarding the whether it's us turns up and does it or another contractor, it's again back down to the landlord. But if I feel that property, again, it's down to the engineer, I believe, to put down the time scale to retest the whole property, or even to go back to get the remedial works done, definitely 28 days, but to retest the whole property again. If I feel that there's so many C2s in that property, or even quite a few C3s that I feel could be a C2 in another year's time, for instance, I'm not going to put another 5-year retest date on that fuse board sticker, or even on the certificate. I'm going to say, hang on, I feel that this needs retesting again within a year, or within 6 months, or possibly 28 days, because it is going to be dangerous. So I had a bit of a discussion with a fella on one of the socials a few days ago, and he sort of disagreed. He said if you test that now for the rented sector, 5 years is the next test date. That's what you put on it. Well, I don't believe that that's true. Down to the engineer's judgment, if you feel that installation could deteriorate further, if they don't get all of the C3s done, in another year's time, that could be C2s or possibly C1s.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget the legislation clearly puts the 5 years the maximum, doesn't it? So typically, David, what are you putting on yours? Are you leaving it at the 5 years, or are you starting to bring it in a bit?
Well, again, as Boyd's saying, some landlords they think of it as the 5-year test, and they end up saying, "I need a 5-year ticket on my property." You'll get it if it's in A1 condition, yeah, but or at least in decent condition. But as Boyd says, if there's something that you need to keep an eye on, if you've got, for example, poor IR readings on a circuit, and it's getting down a bit too low to be comfortable, it's not a failure yet. You're still within tolerance, but it's starting to. It's much lower than it ought to be for what it is.
Starting to creep, isn't it? Yeah.
And then we don't necessarily stick 5 years on it. We might put in something shorter, even a year, 2 years, whatever, depending on where it is and what it's doing. But what we sometimes say to landlords, we've got obviously a lot of repeat landlords who use us year on year, property on property, whatever. Is that we don't necessarily need to do the whole lot again. If everything else is tested out okay, it may just be that we want to test that circuit again after a period, just to see whether the degradation is continuing or whether it's stable. And if it's stable, then we might extend it for longer again. If it's degrading further, then obviously something needs to be done, because we're getting to a point where it's going to be problematic. So when we do less than 5 years on a cert, it's not necessarily for the whole lot to be redone. It might just be that something we want to keep an eye on, probably poor IR, something like that, or something that we can see is from its installation is physically degrading as a result of where it's installed, how it's installed. And we think, well, okay, it's passing now, but there's no way we're sticking 5 years on it. And one interesting one I had last year was I normally put on as well 5 years or change of tenancy. And again, that's not necessarily that when the tenant changes, we need to redo the whole lot again. But what we might want to do is a sort of quickish check for our landlords, just to make sure that the previous tenants haven't done anything obviously stupid, like changing the lights, changing fittings, adding stuff in a poor fashion, that a DIY fashion that perhaps isn't great for the next people coming in. If we look at it and can see that it hasn't been monkeyed with, then again, we might sort of say, okay, well, that looks like it's okay. We don't necessarily have to retest the whole lot again. But I had one letting agent come to me saying, we don't want to see, we want to see just the year on it. We don't want to see or change of tenancy. We want them to reissue the CICR with that bit removed. Which got my back up, because, as I said to them, I'm the inspector. I will decide when I'm happy for it to next be inspected, and I will issue a new report on that inspection. And this was a national letting agency, and their terms and conditions that they've got there is that if you're doing reports for properties they maintain, they don't want to see that. They want it to be a fixed term and not some change of tenancy which could happen any time.
So that's important, Paul, isn't it? So it's clear that the legislation or the round tables information and the stuff coming out from Electrical Safety First clearly says it's the inspector should be putting this date. That's right, isn't it?
You're absolutely right, and the stuff that David's saying there is absolutely spot on, but unfortunately it doesn't get seen like that, so it becomes a bit unhelpful, because it doesn't say on change of occupancy we would like to come in and just do a visual or a limited test. It's basically saying on change of occupancy it's another EICR. So this is why the letting agencies don't want to see it, because the regulations is a maximum 5 year, or the inspector could put a lesser period, like David said. If there was a IR problem on a circuit and you wanted to monitor it, you might say, we'll give it a year. You go back in a year's time and it's not degraded any further, you might say, oh, well, we'll now increase it. And that's the importance of the landlord keeping records. But the change of occupancy was something from a guidance note from years ago. It doesn't work with the current regulations we have. So the guidance out there for the landlords is that on change of occupancy, they should have a check, but it can be a visual check. So they can go around and they can say, there's been no alterations, there's not been a dodgy, an extension lead thrown out the window, there's no cracks, there's no burns. And that kind of basic guidance is given in a lot of places. We certainly give it to the landlords to show them what to look for. Any signs of a problem, they engage with electrical contractor then for an EICR. But really and truthfully, whilst we've all done it over the years and I understand the reasons behind it, it's not really helpful to the PRS industry, because they have some properties have a high turnover of tenants, and every 5 minutes they're going, oh, it needs a new one because it says change of occupancy, which is not what David means there. He means it should be monitored and checked that there's been nothing dodgy added or kicked out. So really and truthfully, it should be the time. Yes, we'll decrease the time if you can justify it. So you've got a low IR reading or something. I slightly disagree with Boyd on the 28-day thing, because if you give somebody an action to get the remedials done in 28 days, so you give them the report, if they get an EIC to show the work's done, they don't then need it on the EICR saying it needs testing again in 28 days because they've had the EIC. I might have misunderstood what you're saying, Boyd, but yeah, if you decrease it to a year, 2 years, and you can stand by your justification, that's absolutely fine. And the landlord has to go by that date. They cannot say, oh, well, it's 5 years, so I'm going to ignore you. They have to, if there's any problems, any comeback, any backlash, the inspectors stated it should be done in 3 years' time. That's when it should have been done.
Yeah, it's key. We are getting into eating into people's evening, and I'm aware England have kicked off somewhere. I promise I've not got it on another screen. I really haven't. But I'm keen that we are eating into a lot of people's evenings. Just to sort of sum up, then, do we think it's working, guys? Just very quickly, a couple of words from either of you. Do we think this is working, and do we think the deadline is doing what it should be doing?
I think it's definitely working. Like Paul said earlier, it's increasing and getting the safety of every installation that landlords own. What I want to see is this bringing into the homeowner sector, which I believe that's being discussed. 10 years for a recommended test on an actual, a new property or somebody's owned property. Bringing this into the homeowner side, that'd be brilliant.
What about you, David? Is it working for you, this new scheme? Well, say new, it's been around for about a year now. The deadlines are here now. Are the deadlines working, and are we having safer installations?
I think it can't be a bad thing. As Paul was saying earlier, it's got to be good that it's increased awareness. You've now got, as well, on websites like the Competent Persons Register, you've got that demarcation so people can specifically search for those who are accredited for inspection work, whereas that wasn't there before. And even those doing fly-by-night inspections, you would hope, would go in and spot things that are obviously very wrong, like broken sockets, exposed live parts, etc. If they're doing anything more than just turning up and wiping their boots on the doormat, then there should be some obvious things that at the very least get picked up. So it's got to be a good thing that this is the awareness is increasing, but the awareness as well, not just for the landlords, agencies, homeowners, but also for electrical contractors who perhaps offer these services without having had the insurance in place before, or the training like the 2391 or the 2395, whatever. Now thinking, well, okay, if I'm really getting into this, perhaps I need to be making sure that I put these in place where I didn't have them before. So I think it's a good thing. I think the timing of it was tricky with COVID. Yeah. But obviously, nobody knew that was going to land with quite the impact it had.
And from a scheme operator's point of view, is it working for you?
Yeah, I mean, like we said, we're delighted that, properties have got to be safe throughout the tenancy, okay? So this is going, huge steps towards making that happen. You know, Darren, you've been around it over the years. There's always niggles and things that need ironing out, but we'll get there. We'll get there, you know. And that's what we do when we do our campaigns and our road shows and our training. We're all about giving people CPD, whether that's raising the level of knowledge of inspectors or whether educating the landlords. That's what it's all about. So that's all I've got to say.
I think what we're all agreed on is, yes, it's good, but there's always more, isn't there? There's always a little bit more we can do. So that education part that I think you finished on, Paul, there is key. If we are truly going to make sure that installations in the private rented sector are safer, it's about the education bit, because unfortunately there are still them landlords that this deadline will just come and go by and they'll try and forget it and just claim innocence and say, no, I didn't understand it. But here, we're here doing our bit. Hopefully this will get shared with the people that are watching tonight. We really do appreciate it. We've had up to 50 people watching live, more people that come that watch it later on. Get the chance to share it. Let's keep this debate going on. Let's get us back here again in a couple of months' time, maybe. Have a look to see how the deadline actually worked and if it is doing what it's meant to be doing. And let's just keep talking and trying to make those installations safer and trying to give everyone out there a little bit of help. So don't forget, it's Electrical Safety Roundtable. We showed you that earlier on. So if you want to scroll back and you'll see the website there. There is stuff out there that can help, so please take that from me and the guys. We really do appreciate your time tonight. We know it's still difficult out there, so we do just hope that you're all staying safe. And to Paul, to Boyd, and to David, thank you very much for your time this evening, guys. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you here. And again, I hope you stay safe and well, and we'll hope to see you again soon. So say goodbye, Darren.
Goodbye, Darren.
Bye, Darren.
Thanks a lot, guys.